I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
Dean, this week I've got special news. I'm coming to you live from my mother-in-law's spare room, which might be the most uncomfortable place I've ever podcasted ever. It is briefly beaten out by the time I did sit on the floor in my basement to record an episode. Her house is great. She's great. I love her. But I'm sitting in a very uncomfortable chair in a very tchotchke-filled room. And it's challenging.
Man, we should really keep a running sort of tally of all the weirdest places we've recorded a podcast. But I think that is probably at the top.
I think so, too. Folks, I'm in a big transition right now. I'm moving to another country, and that's really exciting. But until I officially leave the United States, I'm in a very weird space mentally and geographically. So anyways, bear with me. I'm so sorry for whatever this recording sounds like in the end. But barring all that, Dean, I've heard that you have another game that we can play.
That's right. Before you do leave the shores of the United States and say goodbye to Lady Liberty, I thought it would be an appropriate time to start talking about what everybody's talking about these days, evangelicalism in the United States and elsewhere. We're going to talk on this episode today about the big weird trend of evangelical media, evangelical documentaries. There's just a whole wave of them. But before we do, I have a couple of sort of quiz questions. Last time on the episode, we did a game where I asked you about 20th century televangelists or kind of big evangelical pastors. And I thought, what better way to kick this off with some Carl Lentz facts, some Hillsong facts. And I can't even remember what we titled the game last time. Oh, it was Pastor I Hardly Know Her. So I guess this is round two. Pastor I Hardly Know Her, all focused on Carl Lentz, and I only have two for you this time, but I'm excited to see if you can get them. So these are, if you've watched the most recent Secrets of Hillsong documentary that they just sort of released, not a secret anymore, I think that you'll get maybe sort of the vibe of these questions, but probably not the answers. So you're going to have to draw on the way the documentary has formed you, Matt, and you can figure it out.
Oh my gosh.
So the first question, I know, the first question here is, we all know Carl Lentz was present at the baptism of Justin Bieber in a big bathtub. That is so important. But which of these three NBA players was also baptized by Carl Lentz? So I'm going to give you three.
Oh my God.
LeBron James, the Space Jam himself, Kevin Durant, or Pascal Siakam. Which of these three was baptized by Carl Lentz before his big fall from grace?
Kevin Durant. He seems like a medium famous person for Carl Lentz to dunk in his bathtub.
You got it. You're right. Exactly. Ding, ding, ding. That's
nice.
10 Hillsong points for you. Good job. And the second one here is, so the end of the Secrets of Hillsong documentary, it shows Carl Lentz working at a marketing firm, which we'll talk more about later, an extremely funny scene. But in March of this year, what they don't tell you is that he was hired by a church in Oklahoma. He is not a pastor, but he is on staff. And I'm going to give you three potential names for this church, and you can tell me which one you think it is. Is the church...
This will be impossible.
Is the church called Elevate, Transformation, or Solid Rock?
It's called Solid Rock. It's got to be, right?
You got this one wrong. It is Transformation Church in Oklahoma, but I'm glad to have pulled one over on you. Tragically, it is also not called Our Lady of Perpetual Praise Songs, which I think is a missed opportunity. But he is at Transformation Church, and all the best to him. I hope it works out.
Somewhere out there, there's a Gen Z priest in formation who will do a youth ministry that is called Our Lady of Perpetual Praise Songs. That's like extremely ironic. I'm looking forward to that. That's gonna be great.
Same.
Thanks for these, Dean. I have actually one for you as well. I thought we could. I want to come back with a game because you got one over on me, and now I feel like I really need to get back at you about this.
Sure.
So here's a similar game. It's not a Pastor I Hardly Knew Her, but it is. It's called Two Albums and a Lie. And This is a game where I'm going to read you 3 album titles, and 2 of them are real Hillsong album titles, and 1 of them is not. And you have to guess which one is not.
Right.
You have to guess the pretender. Okay. So the album titles are this. I went back to find some of the more niche ones, though, so that it'd be a little more interesting. Okay. Anyways, the album titles are God is in the House, Friends in High Places, and For the Glory.
Sorry, what was the first one?
God is in the House.
Oh, I thought you said Blood is in the House.
That would be wild.
That is the album that you get from Our Lady of Perpetual Praise Songs, for sure. That's the Eucharistic album. I'm going to say Friends in High Places has got to be the fake.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Nope, that is a 1996 Hillsong album.
Wow.
The pretender here is For the Glory, which is, as everybody knows except you, an OC Supertones album from 2012. So I'm so sorry.
I mean, they could have overlapped, I think. But the title, Friends in High Places from 1996, is amazing because it does have more of an apologetics kind of vibe, I guess. They're really parodying the culture out there.
I know. It really is. All right, folks. Well, we've got the games out of the way. That's the most important part of the podcast, in my opinion. Okay. So out there in popular culture, there's a lot of big evangelical churches who are contributing vastly to Christian culture. And then one of the biggest and most influential of them is Hillsong Church, or it was. It's not anymore. It's pretty infamously bad now. Hillsong
it's hard to say. Well, sorry to contradict you
No.
right away, but I think you're probably right about Hillsong Church in New York, but it strikes me that Hillsong Ministries is, at least for now, still going strong, or at least people are not cyberbullying them on the internet. I feel like that's kind of the key.
That's true. Maybe not altogether bad, but at least the in New York it changed their name. In Kansas City they changed their name. I know a lot of the Hillsong churches in the United States they've gone through some rebrands. So
Right.
I'm fair enough. All that being said, though, Hillsong is back in the Christian discourse. It's back on the tips of everyone's tongues because of the release of a new-ish documentary called The Secrets of Hillsong. The documentary itself has 4 parts. The first 2 mostly focus on the U.S. Hillsong locations, especially in New York, and around the celebrity pastor and sneakerhead, Carl Lentz. The second 2 episodes feature the father and son pastor duo from Australia, I guess from New Zealand and Australia, Frank and Brian Houston, 2 extremely yucky guys. I don't like them whatsoever. Overall, the documentary highlights the culture of abuse and cover-up that appears to be a systemic part of the Hillsong story. But evangelical documentaries have been kind of on the rise lately, and they're an interesting cultural phenomenon that I think has been popping up kind of left and right. There's a lot of current interest in the spectacle of evangelical gossip, right? You got the new Hillsong documentary, The Secrets of Hillsong, but then there's also another one that previously came out called Hillsong, a megachurch exposed. And then, of course, you've probably heard of too the documentary about the Duggars, Shiny Happy People, that was on Amazon. So a lot of these, docuseries are coming out kind of detailing the, evangelical gossip, but also the ways that evangelicalism has I think hurt people and and covered up abuse through all kinds of really gross systems. So anyways, in this episode, we're going to maybe intervene in that intervention. I mean, those docuseries in the first place are interventions into the evangelical story, right? They're always kind of popping up, trying to tell you that that evangelicalism has a lot of problems and you should be aware of them. But now we're going to intervene on that intervention and tell you maybe a take on them, or what the deeper story is with evangelicalism and why these documentaries are interesting in the first place, but also kind of why they're part of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it's interesting to consider why this content is like having a moment or sort of a surge. And some of the reasons are probably obvious. I don't know if you're one of our handful of Catholic listeners that's like, I have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about evangelicalism. I guess this will be some interesting viewing material for you. If you were part of evangelicalism, it's probably no surprise why people are interested in it. But why don't we just take the reasoning from an Amazon TV executive himself, who I think sheds a little bit of light on this. So the big question is, why is there such a huge interest in these evangelical hypocrisy stories or falls from grace? So Amazon previously made this popular series on the LuLaRoe pyramid scheme. And I don't know, it was like a big success, I guess. I didn't watch it. I think my wife watched it. But it prompted Amazon's interest in evangelicalism. And in an article for Variety that was published pretty recently, the Amazon TV chief, Vernon Sanders, explains that in doing the research for the LuLaRoe documentary, we understood that there was a big community of people who participated as sellers of that product, but also bought the product, a big cross-section of people who would be intrigued to learn more. So with that success, we started to look for things that may have similar attributes, a big community of people who may have an interest in a topic personally and through following the media. And so they made Shiny Happy People about the Duggars, which the Duggars, if you've never heard of them, they are one of the Quiverful families. They have a ton of kids. They were the subject of the 19 Kids Accounting TV show. That show, or that documentary, Shiny Happy People, about them is one of the most watched docuseries on Amazon ever. So it was a huge success, which means you'll probably also see more content like that, I would guess, down the pipe. But I think it's really interesting what he says. The question about why evangelicalism kind of arises because of the success of a docuseries about a pyramid scheme, first of all, which I think is very funny, because evangelicalism is the pyramid scheme of Christianity. You get saved, you tell 3 people that they get saved, and so on and so forth. It's a pyramid scheme model. But there's also this kind of interesting way that the executives are cashing in on, I think, a lot of different trends. Basically, the deconstruction market niche, right? Like people who would have been in the thick of evangelical culture, the high point of evangelical culture, maybe in the 90s and mid 2000s. They're all millennials now who are becoming adults and thinking critically about their childhoods and so on. And I think that the market research is tapping into the fact that there is a huge spectrum of folks who are maybe watching out of curiosity for their own kind of lives, maybe watching out of a revenge fantasy or something, or just wanting to kind of better understand what's going on. Probably there's some stuff too in there about like how evangelicalism comes into the news during things like the Donald Trump election. But all that to say, I think it's really fascinating that producers of media are sort of discovering that there's a market for content about evangelical hypocrisy. And I think that is a pretty interesting way to prompt the creation of this media.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't want to, we could talk more about psychoanalysis and stuff later, because we definitely will. But I'll guess we can mention it here. But to me, there's something like, kind of psychoanalytic driving this, right? Like there's this sense in which TV producers know that people have been harmed or wronged, or even if they haven't been directly, maybe feel this like overarching feeling of harm from evangelical communities like Hillsong or any other church, like the Duggars. It's not hard to find a disaffected millennial who has been hurt by the evangelical church. Pretty easy, right? It's a thing that maybe we all feel in one way or the other. But anyways, it's interesting to see like a TV producer kind of capitalizing on that sense of like hurt, or maybe not even hurt, but just like disaffection. And then creating media that particularly plays into the fantasy of like getting one over on the people that hurt you. And I'm not saying like that's why everyone's watching the show, but that is definitely why I was watching the show. So maybe I'm just speaking biographically here. But anyways, it's interesting. Capitalism, it loves to play in your fantasies, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I mean, as we'll talk about later, there is a lot to maybe bring into a critical conversation around it, like how we're telling the story of evangelicalism or how we're pulling one over on evangelicalism makes a big difference, or how we're not pulling one over on evangelicalism in the end. And, we've talked about a handful of these themes in the past. Like, we've done episodes on deconstruction in the past. We've done episodes on evangelicalism in the past. But I think that this sort of cultural moment is really bringing a lot of those themes to a head. Like, there's a distinct interest in telling the story as a story of scandal, which I think is pretty big. My wife and I watched it, and one thing we were talking about is that it's funny because, like, part of the satisfaction of watching it is that it just feels like watching church gossip for 4 hours, and like, who doesn't like a good gossip story? Like, we all do. The Bible says whatever it says. We all love it. And that is what it is. And I think that there's even some value in that. Like, it can be a sort of cathartic experience to go through. But it does raise questions also about, like, what's the media for? What is it actually accomplishing? Are we pulling one over on the evangelicals or not?
Yeah, exactly. Like, does it really hurt them for people to know this, or does it somehow bolster them? And I think the answer to that is kind of interesting, actually. Before we go any further, though, do we need to talk about, like, what happened in the documentary whatsoever?
Yeah, I guess so.
Can we just... I mean, we don't need to get into, like, into the weeds about the whole thing, I think, because if you feel... I mean, because they're not really outstanding in any way, I think that, like, what happened at Hillsong is what happens at megachurches and evangelical churches across the world. There's, like, a celebrity pastor who gets a little too big for his britches. He is, like, everyone's favorite guy. Everyone thinks he's really great. And then there's a fall from grace when he ends up cheating on his wife, right? Like, that's the story of Hillsong in New York, at least. And there's, I think, some nuance to that story that makes it more interesting than not, but still, I mean, that's the overarching story. And then, it tries to get covered up, but doesn't really work out. And that ends up being, like, a feature of Hillsong in Australia and in New Zealand, that there are these two other pastors who are involved kind of tangentially, Frank Houston and Brian Houston, the person who founded Hillsong in Australia. Who have also been involved in sexual abuse, especially of children in the case of Frank Houston, and then, like, more affairs and cover up in the case of Brian Houston. So what you have is, kind of this pattern of celebrity-ish pastors. Maybe celebrity pastor is the wrong word, but pastors who are extremely popular in their communities and exercise a pretty extreme amount of control over their communities, who then have these giant fall from grace because of, like, an affair or an abuse that they have undertaken. The Brian Houston story, though, is particularly interesting because I guess the big scandal is whether or not he knew about his father's abuse, beforehand while it was happening, that he could have reported it. He argues that he didn't, though there's an ongoing court case that will be wrapped up in the next few weeks that argue that he did know. So we'll find out, I guess, what happened there. But I don't know. Is there any more of the story that I think that we need to say to kind of set up the conversation, Dean?
Yeah, maybe a few details. So, like, you got all the journalistic facts there correct, I think. And if a person has never heard of Hillsong, it might be worth just even explaining a little bit more about the cultural phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
So, Hillsong is interesting because it is many different things. It is a college in Australia. It is a massive record label, basically like a music producing machine, also based in Australia. It is a series of churches linked together that come out of an Assemblies of God denomination or Pentecostalism, some way or other. And it's especially interesting for evangelicals because the Hillsong media machine or cultural machine basically exports itself all over the world. And so whether or not you go to a Hillsong branded church, you end up hearing Hillsong music. And chances are, if you've ever turned on your radio and you're listening to, like, the CCM, Christian Contemporary Music Station, you've heard a Hillsong song before in your life. They are kind of designed to be earworms, but also to create these transcendent experiences or kind of emotional experiences. And so people also get very attached to the songs and music. And it's interesting the way that Hillsong has almost, like, created a sort of out-of-the-box experience of church that it exports everywhere. And in New York City, the particular Hillsong church that Carl Lentz, the pastor, was pastoring, that church was drawing in, like, hundreds of thousands of people. It was a kind of gravity well for celebrities who were thinking about Christianity. So, like I said earlier, Justin Bieber, Kevin Durant, lots of other folks as well kind of came into the orbit of Carl Lentz. So there's this cultural product, a mass-produced form of worship, but there's also this attachment to popular culture. So there's all these bridges where, like, Hillsong is like, transparently trying to be cool church for cool people. This isn't your grandpa's Assemblies of God church. This is a hip church where you can think about prophecy. You can figure out what God is doing in your life. You can listen to Carl Lentz, a guy wearing great sneakers on stage, talk to you about this or that before you hear the next sort of radio hit coming out of Australia. So there's like a whole cultural machine involved. And I think, too, it maybe is helpful to point out that in the sort of Hillsong global apparatus, the kind of project of Hillsong is intentionally international. So there's this maybe anchor church in New York City. There are also a bunch of other churches in the United States as well. But it was strange to kind of learn more about how Hillsong also, they're like doing tours in Indonesia or, kind of going around different countries. There's a kind of missional aspect to it or evangelistic aspect to it that all rides on the kind of cultural production that's happening in Australia. So there's a kind of like, if you want to think about it in a materialist way, and we can talk about this more later, but it's kind of a theological and cultural imperialist project in many respects. It's trying to sort of colonize people's experience of Christianity on purpose. Like it's doing it, without really beating around the bush about that. I think that's the goal. And the term that I've been using to describe it to people is, I feel like it's the McDonaldization of Christianity. It's like, you can go to a McDonald's in, the Midwest in the United States, you can get your Big Mac, but you can also go to McDonald's before you visit, like, I don't know, the Louvre in Paris and also get a Big Mac, right? And that's kind of the draw of McDonald's. Like, maybe you get a special France-flavored McDonald's every once in a while, and that's kind of exciting. But at the end of the day, you go because you know what you're getting. And it's the same with Hillsong. So just to fill out some more of the cultural background. Oh, maybe one other piece that is important is Carl, the pastor who fell from grace or whatever, cheated on his wife, etc. He is interesting because he kind of embodies like each piece of Hillsong in one way or other. So he's the pastor of this megachurch, but he had gone to Australia and studied at the Hillsong College that's there, which is trying to form people to be pastors or worship leaders or music people or whatever they do. And so he came from the US, went to Australia, got trained there, was sort of ingratiated into the upper echelons of Hillsong royalty, like Brian Houston, the founder of Hillsong, and then returns to the United States to plant a Hillsong church and becomes sort of the vector of like, testing out all these different cultural products from Australia. So the fact that he becomes the celebrity pastor and then also becomes, the prime sort of example of the challenges that model produces or the abuse and so on that it produces, that I think is really significant. And one last thing about the documentary. So the documentary, The Secrets of Hillsong, is kind of like two parts. The first part is talking to you about Carl Lentz and his life and his, what he did, his choices, etc. And then the second half or the second two episodes are more about Australia and kind of Frank and Brian Houston and what's going on there. And I think there's probably a lot to say, probably things that could be said better by other people about how the documentary handles even Carl Lentz. Like it presents him in a way that is somewhat sympathetic or maybe empathetic, in ways that I actually didn't mind seeing. We can talk more about the character of Carl Lentz maybe later. But the back half does some interesting things with what's going on in Hillsong, but I think also backs off some of the deeper probing questions. So that's kind of what prompted Matt and I to do the episode, is to be like, there's some interesting stuff happening in the documentary, but also some missed opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe that's a good way into the conversation, right? Because when it comes to like Brian Houston, right, who is like the founder of Hillsong, his story is not sympathetic in the least. Right. And I think that like his character is actually a really good expression of like the the id of evangelicalism or something. Someone who is really not interested in Christianity as such, but is more interested in like the desire for control and sort of like more fascistic types of desire and so on. Whereas Carl Lentz, they do frame him as this like kind of just like goofy guy who made some bad choices and like, is sympathetic and more relatable in some other ways, which I actually, which I don't know how I actually feel about. It's whatever. The documentary made some choices to kind of follow up with him, and Carl Lentz made some choices too in ways that Brian Houston didn't. Right? Brian Houston refused to talk to the documentary, whereas Carl Lentz appeared on camera and kind of gave everyone a weird life update for him and stuff. But I don't know. I guess when you're laying all that stuff out there, though, it kind of they seem like two different sides of maybe the same coin. But Carl Lentz feels a bit more like a person than Brian Houston does.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the way that Carl comes off in general, I think, and this is something we talked about before we were recording this episode, he really seems to me like a person who has always been an undergraduate at an evangelical university, even after graduating. Like, that's the vibe that he gives off. Like, he's always kind of 20 years old and trying to figure out how to be the best Christian he can possibly be. And within reason, right? And what I mean by that too is when you're an undergraduate at an evangelical university, that's like one side, you're trying to be a good Christian, and the other side is like you also want to have sex with your girlfriend, and that's like part of it, it's like that kind of thing. So I feel like that's kind of Carl's trajectory, is that he never really grows out of that phase in the way that other evangelicals might. And I think what's really interesting about the way that he's portrayed in the documentary, and the reason I think he's sympathetic, is that you almost get the sense that Carl is kind of, he's also victimized by the apparatus of Hillsong. Like, he's a very young, naive person when he gets sucked into it, and he kind of like probably couldn't have done something different. I mean, maybe he could have, I don't know. But the big thing about it, I guess, is like, the huge scandal is that he cheats on his wife, which is, a bad thing. Like, I don't think people should cheat on their spouses, but also not that surprising. And in the grand scheme of things you could do that are bad, cheating on your spouse is bad, but it's not as bad as, what Brian Houston does, which is many, many degrees worse than that. So it's interesting for that reason too, that you kind of get the sense that Carl Lentz is just doing what every evangelical does from the time they're like 18 to 22, which is to say not really know what to do about their, how to reconcile their like extremely high demand for their Christian piety with their like carnal desires. And then the fact that you're kind of constantly denying them makes you like act out on them in some really bizarre ways. So yeah, all that to say, like, I don't know, maybe that's why I feel like he's kind of sympathetic, because at a time in my life, I probably would have like very much understood the kind of tensions that he was ultimately failing to navigate. So just a really bizarre character, but maybe not a wholly unrealistic one either, or like unsympathetic one.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I think so much of that too comes through because he does choose to talk to the documentarians, where Brian doesn't. Like, at the very end of the first episode, Carl Lentz shows up on screen, and then in the second episode, you get to hear about like what he's doing. Like, he's living in Florida, and he's like working at a marketing agency, and like, okay, I don't know. He gets to kind of like share more of like what's going on, where Brian is like still embroiled in like a legal scandal in Australia, so he doesn't talk, which makes sense. He doesn't comment, which makes sense. I don't know. All I'm trying to say here is that like, Carl is presenting himself in a really particular way that I think is kind of like a get out of jail free card in some ways.
That's true. Of course.
All I'm trying to say is I don't want to let him off the hook.
Yes.
For anything.
Yes, that's right. And I think you're right. I'm maybe I'm even painting it a little too sympathetic, because it's not like he like, there's a lot of other interesting stuff in it. Like, the way he handles Black Lives Matter is extremely funny and like very bizarre. And in the documentary, he feels completely unrepentant about it, apparently, sticks up for the way he handled it, which is juxtaposed to a variety of people at the church that they interview who tell a different story about it. So yeah, it's not like he was like just this, an innocent lamb who kind of becomes the sacrificial character or something. But I guess all I'm trying to say is like, Carl Lentz, he did a lot of bad things, but like I've seen worse. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Totally. I think that's true. And I think also, I mean, I don't, there's in no sense do you have to hand it to him, but he is like going to therapy and like kind of like dealing with some of these things too. So it's different. Right. Dean, you've got a whole bunch of other, like, I think really interesting things to say about the documentary that I want to get to in a minute, but I do want to talk to, I want to talk about the phenomenon of like watching this for a minute, because I think that's actually kind of an important part of the story, and maybe an important part of like what we're doing in this episode is like, why is it that why do these stories like really appeal to people, or like what do they do for us when we're watching them? And I want to ask you why you watched it in the first place in a minute, but I think like the assumption I'm bringing to the conversation here is maybe a more of like a critical lens, and maybe one that's like, it relies probably too much on psychoanalysis. But, you know, I think that there's like a sense in which like people come, okay, hang on. Let me take 3 steps back. So there's this insight from a philosopher who I loathe to even name on our podcast, named Slavoj Žižek, who is a Slovenian Marxist Hegelian psychoanalysis kind of guy. If you've been on the internet, you've seen him. I don't like him for a lot of different reasons, mostly because he's kind of a creep. But anyways, he has this insight that I think is self-plagiarized in every book that he writes, about canned laughter, about, you know, a show when you're watching I Love Lucy or Friends or whatever, and the TV is laughing for you. And then how that produces a type of catharsis in your life, right? You're tired, you've been working, you know, all day long, and now you're home watching Friends, and Ross, he's making a big joke about paleontology or something, and then the TV laughs for you, and in that moment you're feeling like relief. You know, you don't have to laugh because the show is laughing for you. And I think that like TV functions in that sort of like that realm of fantasy and like doing things for you in ways that we don't necessarily recognize a lot of times. Like, here's another example. Here's an unrealized like popular culture piece that I've never written, but there was a time in my life where I was really excited about the show Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and the other guy who's also in The Hobbit, whose name I can't remember. Anyways, that show is really interesting to me because I think it does something really similar, in that it gives you, it presents to you a Sherlock Holmes mystery that is, for you, the viewer, impossible to solve. Like, you could never just like watch the setup of a show of Sherlock and be like, oh, I know who did this one, because it's like impossible. You couldn't. It's like something that's like completely outlandish and wacky and wild. And only through Sherlock's like mind palace and like deductive skills do you get to learn what the answer to the mystery is. And, you know, when you see Sherlock Holmes solve the mystery, you yourself become like, oh man, I got it. Just alongside Sherlock, you know, I also realized the mystery. So, you know, in the way that canned laughter is like making you feel cathartic and like good about a funny TV show, Sherlock Holmes solving a mystery makes you feel really smart about a TV show. But, you know, in both cases, it's completely fantasy because you're not laughing and you're not solving the mystery. And it's making you feel, but it's making you feel great, right? You're getting enjoyment out of it, right? And I think there's something actually really similar going on in this show. And right now, I'll say I'm just speaking for myself. And if anyone else feels similarly, that's great. And you can jump on the bandwagon. But I don't want to speak for anybody in this case. But like, I was watching this show and I was like really kind of excited to watch it because it was like, it's, you know, we all know people, millennials, people like me. I guess if I'm talking for myself, I know that evangelicals, they're full of hypocrisy. They are people who preach love and acceptance and all kinds of things like that, but really function out of places of hate and fear. And I love to see like those people fall from grace. I love to see that because it's like someone who I think I feel some kind of like, you know, some type of like hurt from. People who have like come out against me in my life in one way or another, like to see them also struggle is like good, right? In like in a bad kind of way. It's like watching somebody who it's watching something bad happen to your enemies, and like that is, I think, a desire I think I have to like work through a lot in my life. But it's definitely like the thing that I thought about most when I was watching this show is like, isn't it finally great to watch these people who I know are bad like get outed on a big Hulu documentary. Isn't that cool? And anyways, all of that's to say, I think that it functions in the same way it does on Sherlock or on Friends, where it's like somebody doing revenge for me, and maybe I'm in this moment I'm recognizing that. But anyways, that's at least part of like the appeal to the show. That's part of the appeal of the show to me. It was just that like it's finally somebody getting their due who I don't like, and that was really compelling.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, I would probably not watch any of these things if it weren't for my wife, because she is very interested in parsing out these parts of her life, because she probably is a healthier person than me. I prefer to forget they ever happened or move beyond them or whatever. And I'm always glad when I do, because there's always something more interesting going on in those stories too than what you initially think. Like, I guess I always sit down and I'm like, yeah, I don't know, like, I'm gonna like see these people be annoying and dumb, and I'll just be mad about it, and I don't want to feel that way, because I have better things to feel in my life. But every time I do end up watching it, like this or Shiny Happy People or something else, you really do get a sense of maybe more of the mechanisms of power and control that not only are part of these stories, but also have been part of you if you've participated in an evangelical situation, and probably others too. I mean, some of these are transferable ideological skills between faith traditions and otherwise. But I think that's true, Matt. Like, you know, I like to think that, oh, I'm watching it for some deeper meaning, or like I'm gonna really like figure something out here. But in reality, it is exactly what you're saying. It's like, at the end of the day, I just want to see like bad people be put on TV in such a way that the TV says that they're bad, and I'm like, aha, I knew they were bad the whole time, and now everyone else does too, and that's great.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, I'm feeling a little bit embarrassed for being so vulnerable about this podcast, about telling you exactly how much I hate these people and how I like to see them like dragged out. I guess all I'm trying to say here is I fully recognize like that's like a character flaw of myself. That's something I need to figure out. But anyways, I think that
it's, you know what it reminds me of actually is what's that place in Nietzsche where he talks about how Thomas Aquinas has that vision of the elect will enjoy watching the damned burn in hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like, you know, the satisfying their desire for divine justice or whatever. And like, yeah, Nietzsche's like, what a completely pathological thing to think. It's true, but guess what? It's there in all of us.
It's true. Yeah, I think so. All I'm trying to say is I can't imagine I'm the only person feeling that way. No. But something I was thinking of, you know, as I was reflecting on these feelings in me, this is okay. So that was my basest desires. Now here's my growth phase, my growth era that I'm in. I was thinking through that particular like feeling I was having, and I thought immediately to Tad DeLay, because whenever I think about psychoanalysis and my own deep feelings, I always think about Tad DeLay's book. In case you don't know what I'm talking about right off the bat here, Tad DeLay, he wrote a book a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago now. It's called Against What the White Evangelical Wants, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in that I think is really useful. But there's a section in there about persecution complexes within evangelical Christianity and how like that functions in your brain at the level of desire, you know, coming from like maybe a Lacanian psychoanalytic tradition. And if you don't know what Lacanian psychoanalysis is, don't stress. I don't really know what it is either. Maybe a little bit. But anyways, there's this part in the book that Tad parses out that I think is really cool. Where he's like kind of reflecting on the liberal answer to, or maybe the liberal comportment or like attitude towards evangelicalism. And I'll read this piece here and maybe we can talk about it a little bit. Tad writes, do they not grasp the notion of hypocrisy? Talking about evangelicals here, not necessarily Hillsong, but evangelicals in large. Do they not grasp the notion of hypocrisy? Why the praise for charlatans? How could they not accept evolutionary or climate science? Why do they mock expertise and defund education? How could anyone inflict their children with conversion therapy? Why do they find the widely popular act of sex a threat? Whence comes the desire for fascism? To each of these questions, my response is a complicated historization of problems impossible to analyze in the abstract. The apparent contradictions are networked, reinforced, and doing precisely what they are designed to do. The reactionary liberals' fantasy supposes conservatives are dupes or in need of education. This deep miscalculation on the part of the liberal misses the point, and liberalism will not save us. Sadism and masochism invigorate a destruction machine resonating with neoconservative militarism and neoliberal economics. and such invigoration cannot be resolved by fact-checking. I like this piece here because I think it's like it's a moment where you can kind of check yourself with some of this. And it's like, you're wanting bad things to happen to people. And while you're watching all of this unfold in a documentary, you can be like, well, how did all these people who go to Hillsong in the first place do this, right? Like, they've got to know that that Carl Lentz, a millionaire preacher, is not a good person. Like, they have to know that he's actually fake. They have to know that that Brian Houston is actually like a sexual predator. Like, how can people fall for this, right? And I think that the instructive point here is that conservatives, evangelicals, they're not being duped into this, right? That they are like, that the people who are leading them are involved or invested in power, in the desire for more power, is not like, maybe it's like what's covered up, but it's not like people don't realize that or something. And it's in fact what they want. Within evangelicalism, gaining power is like the whole point, and exercising that power brutally is the whole point. So I guess like this thing from Tad here is helpful because, if we're asking the question, or if we're searching for like feelings of superiority, or like, how are these people tricked, I think it's kind of the wrong way to approach these types of stories about evangelicalism, because it's not really people being tricked. It's like, this is the way that it works, and people on some level enjoy the cruelty of it all. They enjoy the power in it. They enjoy having like a figure over them who has some type of like, fascistic type of role in their life, of a pastor. And I think that is maybe the deeper story here that goes untold in stories like, Hillsong, or in stories about the Duggars, right? It's not that the scandal is not the cruelty or control or sort of like, big fascist pastor in a church. Like, that's the draw instead.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that's the important thing that even the documentary misses, because the story is told, and not just this documentary, basically every documentary I've ever watched about evangelicalism, the story that's told is like, these people claim that they're following Jesus Christ. A thing that documentaries always assume is kind of self-evident. Like,
yeah,
Jesus, he loves everybody. So, of course, these pastors should also love everybody. And guess what? They didn't, or they don't. And that's the whole conceit of it. And I think, these documentaries, that's ultimately the point they want to make. And so all the evidence that they marshal is kind of in service of saying, like, look at these bad hypocrites. If they were really following Jesus, they wouldn't do this. But the strange thing is, the next natural question is, okay, if they're not following Jesus the way that we think Jesus should be followed or whatever, then what are they doing? And the conclusion the documentaries leave you with is like, well, they're just following their own selfish interests, which is like partly true. There's a kind of Machiavellian reality to these kind of church politics. That's all accurate. But the harder and more important question is like, what's the deeper reason that actually doesn't make these things hypocritical at all, but makes them consistent, like makes them part of being faithful to the tradition, is that you would be this kind of person. You would have these kinds of ambitions. You would politic in this way. It's something you see in the Shiny Happy People documentary, for example, where they probably actually do a better job than the Secrets of Hillsong. They do tell you a little bit about the kind of theological world the Duggars live in, where there is a bit of a, there's this hierarchy of like, the dad is on the top, there's this big dad umbrella, and then underneath that is kind of the family umbrella, and underneath that is the kids, and you kind of go up the chain of authority. And so naturally, Jim Bob Duggar, he ends up, exploiting his own children for personal gain and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, Jim Bob Duggar is not like a kind of secular maniac who is just using Christianity to his own ends. Like, it's part of his Christianity to exploit his children. Like, that's what's important. And I think it's the same with Hillsong in a way that the documentary kind of like gets close to, but steps back from at the end, because they try to tell you a little bit about some of Brian Houston's theology, some of the Assemblies of God stuff, some prosperity gospel stuff. But they can't really sort of figure out the point that Tad makes, which is that, these are all part of the same theological worldview. And in fact, like, making wrong choices is part of it. Like, abusing other people is part of it, forgiveness is part of it, or not forgiving someone is part of it. It's not just hypocrisy. It's like there's a whole theological world in which cheating on your wife and then also expecting to still be a pastor makes complete sense. Or like, having a kind of abusive model of getting like volunteers to do a ton of work on a Sunday that's totally unpaid labor and incredibly exhausting. Like, of course that makes sense in Christianity. Like, that's not hypocritical. That's just part of it. So, that's the one thing that these documentaries can't penetrate is like, what is the Christian motivation that makes these bad habits legible? And I don't know, we just need somebody to figure that out. And Tad gets us there in a psychoanalytic way. We need a Marxist also to maybe continue that story in an economic way too.
Yeah. Before we get to the Marxist point, I think because it's a good one. Just as like a quick aside, maybe not an aside, but like the place that Tad DeLay ends up going is that like turmoil and anxiety are really important parts of Christianity, and to feel like you're under attack from the world means that you're doing it right, that you're being faithful, right? So like that's kind of like the end there, and that's how a lot of this makes sense. Is that the persecution that Brian Houston is facing even now in Australia is like emboldening him as like a person of faith, right? He's not questioning his faith because of it. He's not having like a Job moment where he's asking God to kill him or something. He's feeling like this is all good. This is what happens to people who are godly in some way, right? They get persecuted, and that's just the way it works. If you're being persecuted, if you're feeling this anxiety, if you're feeling this turmoil in the world, that means that you're doing what's faithful, and like that's kind of what's at the heart of the matter. And that's what makes, I think, evangelicalism like, fundamentally fascistic, right? Is that you have to feel this anxiety. There's no sense of like resolution. There's no sense of harmony or peace. It's just like all tough all the time, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing that's strange about that too is it's what makes maybe Carl a more sympathetic character in the end, because for all his faults, he did say, he came clean at a certain point. I mean, not just voluntarily, like he was compelled to, but he did ultimately divulge even more than he had to. And I think he had this moment of being like, if I'm going to be an authentic Christian, then I guess I just have to get it all out on the table so that I can deal with it, And that's the thing that Brian Houston doesn't do. Like, he is defending at every turn, refusing to really admit his complicity in what's going on, is essentially incapable of understanding the system as an abusive system, and on the contrary wants to uphold it and to say, like, I've always done whatever I'm supposed to do in order to, make it work. And I think that's also the strange piece about it is you might also conclude in the documentary that Carl is striving to be a better Christian than Brian Houston, which is like maybe true in a certain sense. Like maybe Carl Lentz is like more capable of having an introspective relationship to that question than Brian Houston. But the more interesting way of putting it, I think, is that Brian Houston is just continuing to be a Christian in a different way. That's what's more important. His Christianity relies on not having that introspective piece of it. And like, that's not hypocritical. That's just part of the machine working the way that it ought to work.
Totally. I mean, you can imagine, right, Carl Lentz at this new church in Oklahoma preaching 1,000 sermons about his fall from grace, right? Like, it's just going to become a part of it, right? The persecution narrative, I was at the very top and then I was brought very low and now I'm back here. Like, it's just gonna be all used as credibility for his ministry, which I think is actually really bad, toxic, awful.
Yeah. Well, all right. We've got about 10 minutes left. Maybe we can pivot a little bit more to what I think we need in terms of an analysis of evangelicalism, and we can figure out some other avenues there. I said Tad does the psychoanalytic piece. He does use Marx too. So I'm, maybe just saying we need more people to get their hands on the ball when it comes to providing a material analysis of evangelicalism. I made some tweets about it a while back, and I thought we could talk through some of it. There's not really a materialist analysis of global evangelicalism, in part because it would probably be like an impossibly monumental task. Like, you'd have to track money flows that are super opaque and hard to kind of track. You'd have to determine like the exact mechanisms of exploitation that happen in evangelicalism. You'd have to identify transnational relationships and political forms and all that kind of stuff. But I think you actually have to do that to understand evangelicalism, because it's not fundamentally a private faith tradition. It is fundamentally public. Like, evangelicalism is always politically expressed and always has moneyed interests. And I think that's the thing that these documentaries are always gesturing toward. Like, they can point out, look how much money Hillsong is making, but they can't tell you necessarily how or why. And ultimately, that's not really the point of the documentary. You know, the point is to use that to shore up the other point about hypocrisy. So I don't know, Matt, if we were going to do a materialist analysis of global evangelicalism, what would we have to do to get there?
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, we would need like the someone to hack the mainframe or whatever to tell us where the money's coming from and going. But I mean, it's true. The documentary does gesture towards that. Like in the very beginning, they say something like, you know, Hillsong is making millions every week. Like Hillsong New York is making millions every week from, tithing and donations. And it's largely untaxed money. And where's it going? And that's a great question. What's it paying for? You know, and like a lot of the answers to those questions would be really boring things, like it's going to Carl Lentz's like probably big salary or something.
His sneaker
budget. I think his sneaker budget. The maybe other thing that'd be really revealing is, you know, where is it not going? Like, what are all of the what's all the unpaid work that's like off the books going on in that church? You know, like who's doing what, and like a big part of it too. I think the most interesting piece of this would actually be to see like a political economy of like the Hillsong music section only, just to be like, you know, who is writing all of these songs? How much are they getting paid for it? There's one point in the documentary, I think it was in the last episode, but now I can't quite remember, where there's someone from Hillsong, I think Hillsong College in Australia, who is like getting ready to go on tour with the Hillsong band, and then all of a sudden they can't go on tour for a reason I can't quite recall. That's not the important part of the story, but the important part of the story was that they said that there's like, you know, $180 as like a day rate as a musician for a Hillsong musician, which is not very much money for someone who's you know, pumping out albums and like contributing to those, right? If you're getting paid $180 as a day rate to record an album, it's just not very much. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't know. It's like, that's $22 an hour. I don't know. That's nothing. That's nothing to make your church a gazillion dollars in licensed music for other churches. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, I mean, those songs are like chart topping and they license them out and everything else. You can't use them in your church without paying for a license to play them, which is also kind of insane. But yeah, that money isn't going back to the artists who create it. You know, I think also like there's a story that we've been kind of telling on the podcast by accident, maybe, about evangelicalism having a global interest. You know, we did this episode on Pat Robertson and Guatemala recently, and how Robertson was actively propping up that fascist regime. You know, you can like Swaggart and Falwell, they're fundraising for fascists in Latin America. And we usually tell the story about that kind of evangelical international ambition in a US-centric way. And I think it makes sense to do that. But one thing that clicked for me watching this documentary is that Hillsong shows that there's another center for imperialist ambitions, you know, like New Zealand and Australia are also a key launching point for evangelical political desire and designs as well. Brian Houston was bragging about going to the White House, invited by Donald Trump, for example. There are all kinds of as we said, Hillsong efforts in other countries, and you have to imagine that like Pentecostals that they find in, I don't know, like the Philippines or in Latin America or whatever are probably not the left-wing ones, you know, like this is just kind of how Hillsong is working. It's tapping into those global imperialist ambitions. And I feel like the story we need to tell is that evangelicalism is like, it is a bourgeois spirituality. It is the spirituality of the ruling class, and it succeeds by drawing in people who are not necessarily in that class. I mean, it does draw in a lot of people in that class too, right? Politicians and rich people and so on, but it sort of sucks in or absorbs the spirituality of working class people too, in such a way that continues to sort of funnel money and value up to that bourgeois class. such that it can, not only operate in its own self-interest of like accumulating money, but they're also creating, legislative efforts. They're like constantly working against LGBT laws, all that kind of stuff, right? So I think that's the other piece, is that there is a real global imperialist ambition in evangelicalism, and we're just maybe not thinking of it that way, such that we're not. Well, maybe people are studying it that way. I just like can't find it. So if you know about it, let me know. But I haven't seen it, and I feel like it's important to sort of affirm that evangelicalism is a political project, in the same way that like neoliberalism is a political project, and they kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, totally. Oh man. Okay. One quick aside. Kristen Cobe-Dumet, she's in the show.
Yeah.
And that was a great piece of it. So it's like, I guess all I'm trying to say when I say that is like that there are people on this documentary who are thinking very critically about evangelicalism as like a theological form and a political form, but it just misses the mark, I think, in some ways.
She's also in Shiny Happy People. She's having a good moment.
That's true.
And a deserved one. Yeah, I don't know. She's great. But I think it's like someone has to sort of pull all the pieces together. One thing,
right.
Like a long time ago, we had Heath Carter on the show, and we were talking about his book Union Made, which is a great book, all about like progressive labor-oriented churches and the class struggle in Christianity. And something he points out in that book is that Dwight Moody was directly tied to the Haymarket riots, and then kind of invents a form of evangelicalism as a direct competitor with the sort of nascent social gospel at the time. And you can trace a line from that to Billy Graham. There's a whole kind of conspiracy around Billy Graham and other evangelicals who are responding to the kind of FDR Christianity of the time, the New Deal Christianity, social gospel stuff. And then you get to people like Pat Robertson, which is maybe the Reagan era, and all the way down the line. And I think the most frightening thing about Hillsong is that it uses it's like accommodated itself to cultural forms in such a way that it is really a Trojan horse for conservatism. Like Pat Robertson is easy to look at in the 1980s and be like, that guy looks my grandpa. He sucks. Yeah, like just a nerd. Like you're not, as an average normal person or like a person who's in touch with the rest of the world, you're not going to look at Pat Robertson and be like, that's what I'd like to be.
Right.
And
but when Justin Bieber is going to the church and like getting baptized in your pastor's bathtub or whatever, it is a lot different. And it's like in its palatability for like the masses or whatever.
Exactly. And where the televangelists mobilize TV, Carl Lentz is mobilizing Instagram, and it's the rise of the influencer pastor. And I think it's important to recognize that all of that packaging and branding and marketing is still part of that global ruling class project. Like you can trace a line from Dwight Moody being mad at anarchists in Chicago all the way to, Brian Houston talking about, I don't know, why gay marriage is bad. And it's really important to maybe keep that thread being like, this is just the next mutation of, right-wing Christian political ambition.
Yep, that's true. Go to a boring church, folks. I made that joke on Twitter and a bunch of people got really mad at me. But if you don't want to go to the big McDonald's church. You don't want to go to a church with a big stage in the middle and a rock band. That's going to get you into trouble for sure. You want to go to a boring church. That at least will keep you out of this particular situation.
If you're going to go to a cool church, it should be like Ernesto Cardenal's, where you all get around in a big circle and you talk about the Bible and revolution for a little bit, and then go like paint, local informed paintings.
That sounds good. That seems like a cool church.
Yeah. You can even put it on Instagram, but you're probably not going to be an influencer.
That's true. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. If you subscribe for $2 or more, you can get an invite to the cool Discord, which is fun. It's still going. People are on there. Man, a bunch of people this past week this past month, they had babies, and congratulations to them. It's so great. Love a baby in the world. Another baby, another problem, but they're good ones to have.
Matt's going into his Duggar era on this podcast now.
That's right. The more babies you have, you can take over your local city council. 19 kids and counting, and they're all going to be city councilors. to make sure that you can pray in school. I don't know. You can also, if you support us on Patreon, sometimes you get access to our behind the paywall Patreon only podcast called The Lock-In, where we do even goofier stuff than this. We haven't been doing it lately because, again, I'm moving to another country, so it's been really stressful on my life. But we'll get back into the swing of things sooner or later. Okay. Our intro music is by Maria Armstrong. Our outro music is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still early.